Chapter 1. Cross-Section of America. The West Shore Railroad Special chugged along the banks of the Hudson River. The run from Weehawken, New Jersey, through New York City and Albany, and finally west to Buffalo, was routine. This morning, however, the train was scheduled to stop at West Point, where many of its passengers would gather up their belongings and step off the train into a new life. In June 1911, the United States Military Academy was in its 109th year. For more than a century, young men had come there to learn the arts of military command and bearing. The curriculum consisted of such courses as civil and military engineering, ordnance and science of gunnery, law, Spanish, drill regulations, hippology, natural and experimental philosophy, chemistry, mineralogy, geology, drawing and drill regulations, cavalry and artillery. The academic experience at the Academy had changed little since Sylvanus Thayer, a career U.S. Army officer who served as superintendent from 1817 to 1833 and came to be known as the father of West Point, had emphasized engineering and thus elevated the institution to one of the foremost colleges for that discipline in America. Steeped in tradition, West Point had produced officers for the U.S. Army since 1802, when its first class, consisting of 2 young lieutenants, had graduated. It had endured a horrific civil war that had ended less than half a century earlier, as its progeny held the highest of command responsibilities in both the Union and Confederate armies. It had borne the ebb and flow of financial shortfall, the wax and wane of political indifference, and the decline of its rudimentary facilities. Still, West Point maintained a command presence as imposing as its spit-and-polish graduates. Its stern gray edifice was a fortress guarding tradition and seemed to whisper the motto of duty, honor, country that would be ingrained in the psyche of every second lieutenant who left its hallowed grounds with a commission in the United States Army. Although the sun was not yet full in the sky, the heat weighed on the shoulders of the young men who spilled from the train onto the platform, milling around. They sized up one another, they stared at the dark Gothic fortress that crowned a nearby hill, and then they began the dusty walk up the steep dirt road toward the top of that hill and the wide plain that featured a spectacular view of the Hudson River Valley below. The young men of the West Point class of 1915 left their civilian lives along that road. Few, if any, of these men, most of them in their late teens, grasped the magnitude of the journey they were beginning. By the time all 287 of them arrived, they were the largest plebe class to have entered the academy. By graduation, their ranks had thinned to 164, the largest number of graduates in academy history up to that point. The attrition rate of more than 40% is mute testimony to the rigors of life at West Point. Among those who persevered, stood the tests, and reached graduation day in 1915, were soldiers whose careers would shape the military and political future of the United States and indeed the world for more than half a century. It included soldiers who would die young and soldiers who would leave varied legacies for better or worse. These were the soldiers of the class the stars fell on. 59 of those who received commissions on June 12, 1915, would earn at least the rank of brigadier general, an unprecedented number in American history. They came to West Point from 46 states and territories, the Panama Canal Zone, and the Philippine Islands. They hailed from big cities, small towns, the mountains and the prairies, each with their own motivation and heretofore limited perspective on the world. They were rich and poor, privileged and working class. One of the prospective plebes trudging up the hill that day was Dwight David Eisenhower of Abilene, Kansas. Taller than most of the others and slightly older at 20, the thoughtful new cadet had been lured eastward by a free education paid for by the American taxpayer. He learned soon enough that education was anything but free. Muscular, with light blond hair and blue eyes, Dwight was born the third of 7 sons on October 14, 1890, in Denison, Texas, to David and Ida Eisenhower. His father had moved the family south from Dickinson County, Kansas, to take a job cleaning locomotives for the Cotton Belt Railroad. With their roots in Pennsylvania, the Eisenhowers had come to the prairie in the 1870s in search of cheap farmland. Before Dwight's 2nd birthday, the family returned to Abilene, Kansas, where David went to work at the Bell Springs Creamery. As Dwight grew up in Abilene, he was fascinated by stories of the city's history. Only a few decades earlier, the town that had sprung to life along the Chisholm Trail bustled with the cattle drives, saloons, and bravado of the Old West. The boy's imagination conjured images of cowboys, lawmen, and adventurers. It was to be a lifelong interest. He also developed into a fine football player.